All right, let's go ahead and bring it back together. So where do we notice the law at work here in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes?
The very first, second paragraph there in the first page of Proverbs says, "Listen, my son, to your father's instructions, and do not forsake your mother's teaching."
That would be the law. That's exactly right. Yeah. Listen. So this is this is right at the beginning on the first page of Proverbs 2:11. Listen, my son, to your father's instruction. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. So this is what the law, how the law functions in a positive sense, right? This is the law doing, helping us live here in the world. Yeah, exactly. Good. Wisdom shows up again through here. Say that last part again, Japik?
You see it all through here. That
yes.
That God is trying to instill that into our feeble minds.
Yeah, right. So this gift all throughout the Proverbs of God giving wisdom, basically. Yeah. And that is the work of the law. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. Where else did we notice the law here?
Page 263.
263.
In the middle. Discipline your children and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire.
Discipline your children, they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. Yeah, if you, we see this a few times. You train a child in the way they shall go. They will not depart from it even when they are old. There's some others too. Yeah, and there's lots of proverbs about receiving discipline. The wise one receives correction. It doesn't, if you've ever, I've certainly had situations when I've worked with people where there are people who are sort of untrainable because you tell them something that they're not doing right and they're very defensive about it and they just can't work with them, right? They just sort of won't work. I'm thinking construction when I've worked in the past. Whereas the people who take instruction and learn from it are great to work with. Even if, they don't know anything they're doing at the beginning, they learn and they become good to work with. Yeah. And there's a lot of that in Proverbs too.
Then on 263 it also says, "A rod and a reprimand impart wisdom."
Yeah.
A child left undisciplined disgraces its mother.
Yeah, so right before that, "A rod and a reprimand impart wisdom. A child left undisciplined disgraces its mother." Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And we don't use rods usually anymore, right? Yeah. But the idea of what the rod represents, of guidance and discipline. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think back of my dad and he was raising us up. He had 7 children, and
yeah,
sometimes the woodshed was awful handy.
Yeah, I remember I had a family who I knew worked with who were dairy farmers, and something the mother said to me, they had several kids and they had adopted a few too. It's like, yeah, we have to discipline our kids because there's so many ways for them to be like seriously injured or killed. They need to learn to follow the rules right away because they can't go climbing on the tractor. They can't go into the pen with the cattle. They can't do all these things. And it was something I hadn't thought about, but it's just, there's a lot of dangers out here in what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, a good friend up east of Cedar Woolley, their 2 children were on the tractor and the youngest one fell off and was run over. Yeah.
Yes, we know stories of,
they should have known better.
Of accidents where children or even adults, frankly, are killed in farming accidents. And the discipline is there. Discipline, when we think about punishment or consequences, we're not, and especially in Proverbs, I think in particular, it's not about getting even or something like that. It's about training for success, whatever success looks like, but success in the world. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My youngest son scared Judy to Dickens over at the other place that we had, and had a ladder leaning up going into the hay barn, and he was only 4 when we moved from there after Halloween. 3 or 4, he climbed that ladder today. He wanted to be with his dad.
Of course, yeah.
Always. He liked to ride on a tractor and everything.
Yeah, Yeah, 3 and 4-year-olds have a way of getting where they ought not to be. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Where else did we notice the law throughout these sections? Yeah, Joanne.
The very last verses in Ecclesiastes.
In Ecclesiastes. Oh, right at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me turn there here.
Now all have been heard. There is an conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments,
Mm-hmm.
for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil.
Yeah, so the last words of Ecclesiastes here, I'm going to repeat them for the recording. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the duty of all mankind, for God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. Now, I love I love that we read both Ecclesiastes and Proverbs in the same week, because the view of the law in Proverbs is much more, it comes across different than it does in Ecclesiastes. In Ecclesiastes, the law is, I hear this very end almost as, this is a piece of comfort of all of these things are well beyond us. You know, all of Ecclesiastes is about futility or meaninglessness in a lot of ways. And so we sort of return to the commandment almost as a place of refuge from the meaninglessness around. We can't control all this, but here's the thing that's been set in front of us, right? And the things that we can't figure out, why good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. God is the one who's overseeing that. That's sort of what this is at the end. Whereas in Proverbs, the law is much more of sort of instruction here and now to take and use. And, you know, I think I mentioned last week, I sort of, whether this is true or not, Proverbs is sort of young Solomon and Ecclesiastes is sort of older Solomon, more cynical Solomon in some ways. And, you know, young and confident versus older and sort of beaten down by the world a bit or by his own life. And again, you know, it's not clear that Ecclesiastes comes from Solomon, and a lot of Proverbs doesn't come from Solomon, but just as a way of thinking about the difference of these books and their sort of viewpoints. But they're both, there's validity to both, right? There's validity in both of these perspectives. Yeah, good. I'm glad that you pointed that out. Where else did we notice the law? Yeah.
Page 250 in Proverbs.
250.
Very hot. Pay attention and turn your ear to the sayings of the wise. Apply your heart to what I teach, for it is pleasing when you keep them in your heart and have all of them written on your lips.
Yeah, good. Pay attention, turn your ear to the sayings of the wise, apply your heart to what I teach. Yeah, all of these are the commands of the law. The other place that we see, both in Ecclesiastes and in Proverbs, and this is a function of the law that maybe we haven't spoken that well about, is one of the things that the law does is it describes things as they are. So it really shows you the way the world is as it is. It doesn't sort of let you sugarcoat it. And in Proverbs, you see it in a lot of these descriptions aren't necessarily like the way that it ought to be, but just the way that it is. I don't know if I'm going to find it here. Anything in particular, but there's so a king's wrath is a messenger of death, but the wise will appease it. So there isn't sort of a moral claim being made in that one, right? That's not really saying, well, kings ought to be wrathful or something like that. It's just sort of the way it is. When a king or a powerful person is angry, the wise thing to do is to learn to appease it, right? And that's just sort of the way that it works. It's more of a description of how things are rather than it is a description of how, or a prescription of how things should be. There's a lot of that in the Proverbs. And so you can't assume that everything here is a command. In fact, there's some that definitely aren't. There's a few that are definitely, a description of the way things are that they should not be. Ecclesiastes then, as a whole, is almost entirely, this is the way the world actually is, right? And it's not making a prescription. In fact, it's sort of, most of Ecclesiastes is sort of giving up. It's despairing of prescriptions in some ways until you get a few like that at the end. You sort of, I see Ecclesiastes, the way that Ecclesiastes has functioned for me is taking us from this, thinking about everything all at once and sort of putting ourselves in the place of God in some ways and shrinking us down to what God has actually placed in front of us. And I think that Ecclesiastes has been helpful to me in particular in that way. Actually, it's one of my favorite books in the Bible for that reason. But so this descriptive, sometimes in Lutheran tradition, and others too, but the law is talked about as a mirror. It's a mirror that shows us as we are, warts and all, and that's part of what makes it uncomfortable often. Yeah.
That brings to mind the beginning of Ecclesiastes.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, for some reason, the word vanity instead of meaningless.
Yeah, most translations use vanity.
It's good for me because it brings to the mental image of looking in the mirror and looking at what we know instead of the larger picture of God. You know, because the word vanity suggests we're just concerned with our own world instead of that larger realm where God is concerned with.
Yeah, I think the word, vanity or vain in older, more archaic English, like King James, so 400 years ago English, has to do with emptiness or things that are nothing. So riches I heed not, nor vain empty praise is actually the more modern translation now, or man's empty praise. But the vain is that this is an empty use of it. To take the Lord's name in vain means to use the Lord's name wrongly, to make wrongful use, a useless use of it.
But a mirror is empty, really.
So the vanity has become more restricted to the sense of sort of being preoccupied with outward appearances or something like that. But the idea, the root there is that these are empty. They're fleeting. They're not lasting. I think the word in Hebrew is hevel, if I remember right, which is like mist or vapor. It's like something that's just transient and barely there at all.
It's virtual, and the reality is bigger than that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reality is bigger or deeper, maybe, than that. Yeah. Where do we notice the gospel in these texts? Yeah.
Well, it may or may not be gospel, but
Yeah.
I was confused by it. Page 288.
288. Oh, Ecclesiastes. Yep.
Yeah, the top of the page. And it says, "And the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it."
Mm-hmm.
Is that implying heaven?
I read that more as just speaking about death. The dust returns to the ground it came from, right? That's very much like ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Right.
Spirit, the word spirit and breath are the same word, and wind in Hebrew. I actually think breath would be a better translation here. The breath returns to the God who gave it. The liveliness returns to the God who gave it. And so I think it's just pointing to death without saying anything about what's after. It's just talking about the end of life.
Okay.
One way or the other. Yeah, it's a good question, though. Oh, and I didn't repeat for the recording. The question was on 288 Ecclesiastes. The dust returns to the ground it came from. The spirit returns to God who gave it. And the question was, is that referring to heaven, the spirit returning? I don't think this means the spirit as like the individual's spirit person or something like that, but rather that which gives life to me, that leaves me on my death. Yeah.
Well, John, that would fit in with, and God breathed into him the breath of life.
Yes, it would. Exactly. Good.
Yeah.
So noticing, the description of the creation of the first human in Genesis 2, God takes the dust or the earth, the Adamah, and forms it into an Adam, a human, and then breathes the breath of life into it, and it becomes a living being. Yeah. So this is sort of the undoing of that, and recognizing that death is sort of the undoing of that. The spirit departs, the breath isn't working anymore, and the body eventually returns to dust, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that the way he made the animals too?
I don't remember there being a description of the breathing in of life into the animals. I'd have to look. I can't remember. I don't remember that being there. The one place I will say in like Psalm 10 or Psalm 90, actually, the Psalm of Moses, if there's a line there of, I don't know if I can find it really quick, of withdrawing. You withdraw, you turn away, and we fall to dust. You send out your spirit and renew the land, something like that. There's this inward and outward. Let's see if I can find it here. Is it Psalm 90? Maybe it's not Psalm 90. No, it's not Psalm 90. It was Psalm 104. I don't remember which psalm it was. But speaking about the sort of giving and taking of life, basically. Let's see. Yeah, when you hide your face, they are terrified. This is Psalm 104. So I'm on top of page 124. When you take away their breath, they die and return to the dust. And the they in this is all living things. So when you take away their breath, could be, I'm not sure 100%, but that might be the word for spirit there. They die and return to the dust. When you send your spirit, they are created. You renew the face of the ground. So there's a sense that all living things we only live because God is providing the spirit, the breath, the wind, the activity, the movement that we need to live. And if God withdraws that, we just stop. There just isn't any anymore, right? Or I should say, when God withdraws that, because all of us will face that, right? We all will have this withdrawn, and then there will be a recreation or resurrection, right? Yeah, good questions. Where else might we notice the gospel? Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. It is there, although I will say these are books primarily about the law. Yeah. Wisdom in general is primarily about the law. That's something that we usually, I think it's easy to get confused on. But wisdom in general is, how do you do things? What's the right way to go about things? What way works? What way doesn't? That's all what the law is about.
On 275.
275.
The first big paragraph down, it says, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like animals. Surely the fate of human beings is like that of animals. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so does the other. All have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over animals. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return.
So what are you seeing there?
Well, people have different views on things. You know, our humans are given the Spirit of God, whereas animals are not. I don't believe they're animals that were put here for our use.
Sure. Yeah.
And God cares for all of us.
Yeah. So I think you can hear some good news in this, but you almost have to bring it from somewhere else, right? It's almost not in this paragraph itself, but if you know the gospel from other places, you'll begin to hear it. And I think that's often true, actually. So the spot for the recording, 275, middle of the page. You know, I also said to myself. So this is something Kohelet is the Hebrew word, the teacher. I think it's a better title than Ecclesiastes. But so Kohelet is saying to himself, the teacher, the preacher, in sort of his journey throughout Ecclesiastes. I said to myself, as for humans, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. So he says, well, what's God doing here? God's showing us that we're just like the animals. We have the same fate. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath, spirit. Humans have no advantage. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. And then that statement at the end, who knows if the human spirit rises upward and if the spirit of the animal goes down into the earth? So he's just sort of saying, all of this seems beyond me. I don't have any idea what goes on with any of this. So I'd say he's almost hoping for some promise. He doesn't have certainty of any kind here. Maybe we can read something in, or we can think of how the gospel might address him in this place. But he's not at the gospel yet, anyways. Although I will say this isn't gospel exactly, but I saw that there's nothing better for a person than to enjoy their work because that is their lot. I have found great comfort. Again, I don't think this is the gospel exactly, but I have found great comfort in sort of being able to just let those things go. What is going on with this? I don't know exactly. Let me focus on the thing that God has put me in front of me now. And the only reason I can do that is because I know who this God is, and because I have heard the gospel from this God, and because I trust this God. So, almost to get to that point, at least for it to be a good thing and not just sort of a whatever, nothing matters, you have to know who this God is, and you have to have heard a promise from this God, right, that you can trust. Maybe we can see how the gospel would address it. Yeah. What else?
I don't know if this is the gospel, but it is to me on page 253.
253.
My favorite proverb. By wisdom a house is built, and through understanding it is established. Through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures.
It's a lovely description. Yeah, by wisdom a house is built. I have that underlined in my read-through. Through understanding it is established. Through knowledge its rooms are filled with rare and beautiful treasures. Yeah. It's certainly pleasant. yeah, I'd have to think about, there's ways, is that a promise? Or is that a description of what will happen if you are wise? I think you can hear it both ways. I think you could hear it both ways. And it's probably going to hit you differently in different times. So on the one hand, I can hear it and say, I can give thanks for the house, the household that I have as a gift that has been given out of God's wisdom. I'm operating out of the gospel there if I hear it that way. And I'm guessing that's more the way you're hearing it there. On the other hand, I can say, all right, I want a house to be established. I want rooms filled with rare and beautiful treasures. Therefore, I must apply myself to wisdom. I must become wise and successful. Now I'm approaching it through the realm of the law. So there's two ways I could see this functioning, at least in both those ways. Yeah. Good. Where else might we see the gospel in here?
Go hand in hand, don't they? The law and the gospel.
Yes. In fact, Luther will talk about, so the question was, they do go hand in hand, don't they, the law and the gospel? Luther describes them as God's two hands, in fact. So the left hand being the law, I don't know why the side matters, but the left hand being the law, the right hand being the gospel. Now sometimes, just like when you're doing something, those hands are going to be working against each other, right? And they have to. If I want to make something into a ball, they're going opposite directions, right? And the law and the gospel will work that way, where the law and the gospel also seem to be at odds with each other. And then sometimes the gospel will even oppose or violate the law. Jesus on the cross is an example of this. Your Jesus is being, an innocent man. This is a great miscarriage of justice that's happening here. Luther will even go so far as on the cross, God is against God. We see God against God here on the cross. But all of this is happening for the purpose of forgiveness, of resurrection of life. And that even when they are against each other, they're always working towards the same outcome. Maybe the reason why you'd say the law is the left and the gospel is the right, God is apparently right-handed in this analogy, is that the gospel is the final word, right? It's the stronger word. So Luther also talks about the two kingdoms of God, the kingdom of the law and the kingdom of the gospel, God's left-hand kingdom, God's right-hand kingdom, and that they're both working together, even though the right-hand kingdom is the final word. The gospel word is the final word. But the law is necessary. We need it. The law, by wisdom, the earth was established. And we read that fairly early too, that I was there at the beginning, this sort of monologue from Lady Wisdom speaking. Yeah.
The law shows us why we need the gospel.
Yes. So the law establishes us. It keeps us safe. Again, not perfectly. It's a leaky bucket. And it shows us who we are. It shows us in the mirror how the world actually is. It shows us that we aren't able to do this on our own, that we actually are in need of something else to come. So it points us towards the gospel. Yeah. Bonhoeffer uses the terms penultimate and ultimate. So the law is penultimate. That means it's what comes right before the end. And the gospel is the ultimate. It's the very last thing. And so the law is the second to last, and then the gospel is the last. And so they work together. There's a sequence to them. Now, of course, in everyday experience, the gospel comes in one moment, the law another moment, both at the same time as a third moment. It's all mixed up here, but sort of logically, as you're thinking about it, there's sort of an order that goes with them. That's why the catechism's arranged how it is. If you open up the small catechism, it goes the 10 Commandments, then the creed, the law, then the gospel. But of course, in reality, all of these things are all over all the time. Yeah. What surprised us in these readings?
Solomon's sadness.
In Ecclesiastes, in particular, Solomon's sadness. Yeah.
Or his sign of futility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's not explicit that it's Solomon. It sounds a lot like Solomon. It's, clearly some king descended from David. But regardless of whether it's Solomon or not, like the fact that it's made to sound so much like Solomon, at least, I think we're at least meant to think of it in terms of Solomon. And it's surprising how sad he is, or how much his wisdom in Ecclesiastes. So in Proverbs, you get the sense that his wisdom, and when it's Solomon or whoever, is going to bring him great success. And in a lot of ways it does. But it also reveals to him that there's so much beyond. Like he's more aware of his limitations than other people are, because he has more time to think about it, maybe. He has more wisdom to apply to it. I've often found, I don't know if this has been studied or not, but that I know that at least in some, there's like high achieving like kids, students, often have higher rates of depression. And I wonder if there's some correlation there, sort of an ability to sort of exceed where you are, but then you hit your limitations harder or something like that. I'm not sure, but
I think it was written at the end of his career as a king.
Maybe, or maybe it was written later. It depends we don't know who wrote it. So we don't know that it is. So it says son of David, but son of David can mean just descendant of David. It doesn't necessarily mean the son. But Hezekiah is another one I've actually heard it attributed to, who's much later. Whoever it is, it seems to be, I'd say, later in life at least. Yeah. What else surprised us?
I don't know if it's surprised, but I really appreciated it's on page 284 near the bottom. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools.
Yes. Quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools, is page 2, or ruler of fools, sorry, page 284. Mm-hmm. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. This is his example of wisdom right before this. There was a poor man who was wise, who saves the city while it's in a siege by his wisdom, but nobody remembers the poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength, but the poor man's wisdom is despised. His words are no longer heeded. So it's like, this is better, and yet nobody recognizes it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that where the saying, speak quietly but carry a big stick?
It's at least that saying is evoking the same spirit here. Whether it's directly inspired, I don't know. There was one in Proverbs of, what was it? It reminded me of the saying that we have of it's better to be thought of as a fool than to open your mouth and confirm it or prove it. Yeah. There was something in here like this too of a fool will be thought wise if he keeps his mouth shut or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but that was in Proverbs. But yeah, there's a lot of Proverbs, modern Proverbs that you'll find in here. And the book of Proverbs is not unique to the Bible. Well, let me say that better. There are a lot of Proverbs within the book of Proverbs that are found in all sorts of cultures all over the place. This isn't specific, only Israel knew these things, wisdom. Whether it borrowed on those cultures or they just came up with them at the same time, I don't know. But again, Proverbs is one of the writings. It's engaging everyday life, right? And so it's also engaging non-Israelites in some ways. And Solomon is renowned for that, right? There's people traveling to hear Solomon's wisdom in the accounts of Solomon in 1 Kings, for example. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that in the first part of Proverbs, wisdom is a she.
Yeah.
And
This lady wisdom, kind of personified in the beginning of Proverbs. Yeah.
right.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered on 224 at the top, where wisdom is talking or speaking.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works.
Yeah.
Before his deeds of old, I was formed long ages ago at the very beginning when the world came to be.
Yeah.
Made me think of Eve.
Oh, that's interesting. The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works, as top of page 224. Before his deeds of old, I was formed long ages ago at the very beginning when the world came to be. And so thinking of wisdom as Eve, that's interesting. I think this is even older than Eve. The first of his works is before the earth, before anything. Yeah. So this is, I think I mentioned last week maybe, I can't remember, or I mentioned to somebody at some point, that there's this tradition of how to understand wisdom and wisdom, sort of lady wisdom here. And so Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. So there's a Christ Sophia tradition that tried to interpret this, wisdom here as sort of the second person of the Trinity, as Jesus pre-incarnate. There's a Spirit Sophia tradition that, well, the wisdom is the Holy Spirit that's speaking here. One of the early disputes and heresies in the Christian church is called Arianism, which is different from the Aryan nation Arianism, spelled different, named after a guy named Arius. And he taught, and actually maybe even most of the least powerful people within the church for a while agreed with him, that wisdom especially referred to the Son of God, the Logos, the Word of God, as John talks about it. And he pointed to a passage like this saying, and this shows that Jesus is not God, but is God's first creation, first and best creation. And so that Jesus is something other than God, that there is God and then there's Jesus, the first creation of God. This is called Arianism. This ends up being rejected. It takes a while. It's actually one of the things that leads to the development of the Nicene Creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty. That Council of Nicaea and later of Constantinople are dealing with this issue of Arianism, Nicaea in particular. And so we have to be a little bit careful about what's being said here and what does this mean. So Eve is an interesting one. I wrote next to it, wisdom equals law, that God's law is the first of God's creation, and then God establishes the creation according to it. So when I say law, I mean more than just the Ten Commandments. I mean the laws of nature. I mean the laws of, the things we describe scientifically as gravity, as electromagnetism, as all of these different forces and things that make our world livable, that make this exist, that make this happen, time and space, the light speed limit, all of these things, as ways that the world is built, the sort of logic on which creation is founded. And I think there's a connection between wisdom and that. And it's also important to notice the law then is not God. The law is not God's inner essence. The law is God's creation, which is true. The law is not God. This is part of what we mean when we say that the law is penultimate, or before the end, and the gospel is the ultimate. But the law is actually something that God creates and gives. It's not sort of the eternal inner expression of who God is, which is a common mistake that, I don't know, maybe most Christians make. And not just Christians, but I'd say most religions make, one way or the other, that God is law in one way or another, whether that's understood as wisdom or however it's understood. But God is wilder than that, which is for better and for worse, although ultimately for better.
But they're his laws.
Yeah, so this isn't to say that law, the law is still the first of his works. Wisdom is the first of his works, before his deeds of old, before creation. Mm-hmm. But the law is not God. What else surprises us in these readings?
Did Solomon have a nagging wife?
Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. So did Solomon have a nagging wife? Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. The nagging wife comes up quite often. This is, one of the things about Proverbs, especially a few of it, it's very clearly framed as a father speaking to a son. Very much a man speaking to a man. And everything is framed that way. It's about a nagging wife. It's not about spouses. It's about wives, because I'm speaking to a man here, right? And so we, in a culture where it is not only the men who deal with these things, we have to do some interpreting, right? As sort of to apply these some 2,500 years later or 3,000 years later, depending on when and how they were written, or perhaps more actually. Then also, you have Lady Wisdom. You have the wayward woman, right, who is the snare. You have the nagging wife figure. You have the capable wife, or I don't remember how it's translated in this one. A wife of noble character, they translate it here in 267, which ends Proverbs, which is this long description about how wonderful a capable wife is, right? A wife of noble character, who's busy doing everything good all the time. I use this. I've used it a couple times actually in funerals, but I think the first time I used it was for Lorraine Gunderson. Actually, at her service, we used this as one of the readings. Because we've known these women who are capable women, who are doing things, who are always working, who are, right at the end. So the very last verse of Proverbs. Honor her for all that her hands have done. Let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Now, the city gate is the place where it's like the sort of public meeting place. So the elders of the town would sit at the gate and they make their decisions. So this is like official recognition. Let her be praised in the sort of, the city hall, something like that, which would be the equivalent of that. Yeah. But so,
you can still have a gazillion concubines and
yeah, well, this is a different king. This is inspired to the sayings of King Lemuel. I don't know who King Lemuel is. An inspired utterance his mother taught him. This is that one. So comes from King Lemuel's mother, whoever that is. And I have no idea who that is. Yeah. There's the sayings of Agur, son of Jekah. I have no idea who Agur, son of Jekah is. But so Proverbs is this compilation. Much of it's attributed to Solomon, but not all of it. I think about half of it's attributed to Solomon, actually. Yeah. Or 255, these are more Proverbs of Solomon, compiled by the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, who's, many centuries later. That might be part of why Ecclesiastes is sometimes said, maybe Hezekiah. I don't know, maybe because he's mentioned here in Proverbs. But, yeah, I have no idea who King Lemuel is. Not an Israelite, as far as I know. Yeah.
So I have a question. Was there something in the culture that favored people that were right-handed versus left? Because in Ecclesiastes they said the heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left.
Oh, that's interesting. What page is that?
284 at the bottom.
Yeah, bottom 284. Heart of the wise inclines to the right, heart of the fool to the left. Even as fools walk along the road, they lack sense. Let me think here for a second. I'm not sure. That's a good question. So is going to the right hand seem to be better? I don't know culturally. I know today in a lot of Middle Eastern cultures, the left hand is the unclean hand and the right hand is the clean hand. And part of that's for practical reasons, that the left hand is what you use when you go to the bathroom. And so you'd never offer your left hand to shake, right? That's seen as very disrespectful to do something like that. I don't know for certain how that functioned here. I'm also not certain. I can read this two ways. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, that's a good thing. And the heart of the fool to the left, that's a bad thing. I can also read it that the road is straight, and the wise wander off this way, and the fools wander off that way. Everything is meaningless. I'm not sure which way it's supposed to be functioning here. I'd have to think about it and read a little more carefully. Yeah, do you have a sense there?
As a left-hander.
Okay, yes. As a left-hander, Mark needs to contribute here.
Discriminated against all the time. Jesus, I think in Matthew 25, the sheep
Yes.
on the right, the goats on the left.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I think, is that just a general cultural thing?
It might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So pointing out that in Matthew 25, the king judging the sheep and the goats, this is the famous, I was naked and you visited me, or I was naked naked and you gave me clothing, I was in prison and you visited me, or you didn't do this. And those who are entering into the joy of my Father are on his right, those who are depart from me, you wicked ones, are on his left. So there does seem to be a value there too. Yeah, that could be. I think I remember hearing that, maybe you know this, Mark, that the word sinister comes from the Latin word for left-handed. Yeah. Yeah, so there seems to be this long and widely, maybe globally, cultural thing of left-handed people we have to be a little bit aware of. Yeah. There's a judge who's left-handed. Do you remember the left-handed judge? Ehud? Yeah, so in Judges, he's the one who straps a sword on his thigh, but I think because he's left-handed, it's on the wrong side, so they don't check that side. Yeah.
It's to his advantage.
Exactly. So he's able to sneak in and he kills King Eglon, and then he leaves, and the servants don't go check on him for a while because he's in the. They think he's using the bathroom, and they're like, they don't want to interrupt the king. But even there, he's the hero, but he's a sneaky hero, right? You know, he's sort of underhanded. Is that a left-handed referral?
Well, left-handed comment.
Yeah. Interesting. What else surprised us? Before I talk a little bit about what the next couple of weeks will bring us.
Next week we do not meet, right?
Right. Before I talk about that though, anything else on these readings? Any other surprises or questions we wanted to bring up? All right. So our schedule breaks a little bit right now because this is Holy Week. Originally, I was going to try and preach on Job today, in addition to Palm Sunday and the reading of the Passion Story. And I decided after Bible study Monday that there was just no way I could do that and do justice to anything. So I'm not going to preach on Job today, but Job is the next thing we're reading. And so what I would recommend you do is use this week as either a catch-up week, if you need to catch up on things, or you could read the Passion Story. Maybe you could read the Passion in the Gospels if you're looking for something to read this week. And so that might be a good practice. And then next week, so the week following Easter, read Job. So that would be jumping back onto the week number 5 on the reading schedule in the writings. And it's just the book of Job. But you could read Job this week and catch up next week, or you could take 2 weeks to read Job. You can do it however you want. But basically, we do not meet next week on Easter. And then the week following, we will, and I will be here, and we will discuss Job. And so on the Sunday after Easter, we will discuss Job. So whenever you want to read Job between now and 2 weeks from now, you decide. But that's what we're going to do. Job is such a good book. Job is fascinating and challenging and troubling, and it's supposed to be. So Job, the question of Job is essentially this: why do bad things happen to good people? That's basically what it is. And in Job, we have Satan as a speaking character for the first time named Satan, the adversary. We have Satan in God's presence, talking with God. Satan, who does not seem to be God's enemy. He's certainly Job's enemy, but he doesn't seem to be God's enemy in this. God asks Satan his opinion. What do you think about this guy? God seems to be acting completely outside of any sort of justice or law that we would, fairness, sense of morality that we would do. And by the end of the book, it never gives you a logical explanation of why. So it's never going to actually solve the problem. It raises the problem. It addresses the problem. Job is satisfied with what he gets. I don't know that we'll be as satisfied in reading it. So there'll be a lot to talk about here. So really spend time with it. I think Job is very hard to date. We don't know when it was written. We don't know who Job was exactly, except that, he's mentioned in Ezekiel, right? So clearly there's this idea of Job, the righteous, this kind of paragon of righteousness that's been out there. The book itself of Job reads like a play to me. You can very well imagine this being a stage production with sort of this introduction, and then most of the book is this conversation between Job and his 3 friends. And there's this sort of long poetic speeches, something you might get in Shakespeare, these sort of Shakespearean, almost like dialogues that are happening. I guess it's more than a dialogue because there's more people involved. And then God shows up at the very end and has this long poetic dialogue with Job. And then there's sort of an epilogue of how things work out. So it's another one where many of what people are saying in it is actually, by the end of Job, going to be discarded and said, no, this is wrong. So the 3 friends who speak to Job basically are all trying to say, well, Job, this bad thing happened to you. God would never let anything bad happen without a good reason. Therefore, you must have done something to deserve this, right? This is what the three friends are basically all trying to convince Job of, and Job is always resisting that. At the end, when God shows up, God reprimands those three for speaking wrongly about God, and sort of says, well, and I will let Job pray for you, and then I will forgive you. And then so Job is the one who's sort of held up as right. Even though Job is the one saying, I'm righteous, I haven't done anything wrong. God is just doing this to me. And God actually comes in on the side of Job at the end of this. So it's very interesting. So I take time in reading it. Take time discussing it with each other. We've got 2 weeks, so whether you want to wait till next week or whatever you want to do. But I'm looking forward to discussing it here in a couple of weeks. So that's Job. Again, one of the more troubling books, but I think one of the more important books in the Old Testament. Actually, I think it's really important to sit with. That's what Job mostly does, and he mostly just sits and speaks. Does a lot of speaking. So yeah, things to think about. Any other questions or anything? We're a few minutes early, actually. Yeah.
There's over 100 verses of Jesus sitting on the right hand of God.
Oh, good. So bringing up this right hand. So Jesus sits at God's right hand. This is good. The right hand is where the number 2 sits, right? The most important person. We get this in Genesis. Joseph is at Pharaoh's right hand. We have this today, the right-hand man, right? You're the right-hand man of a person, or right-hand woman, I guess. But you're the person's right hand. That this is all over the place. Now, James and John asked to sit at Jesus' right and left. So maybe the left is a close second, maybe. I'm not sure, to the right hand. Yeah, no, it's good to notice that. But Jesus sitting at the right hand of the Father, which means Jesus the one in charge now. That's what that's saying. Although Luther also makes a big deal. Now I'm thinking about this left and right-handedness. Makes a big deal that Jesus is on the right-hand kingdom, the gospel kingdom, rather than the law kingdom. So that there's a kingdom of Christ that is especially the right hand, where Jesus is especially going to reign. That's actually part of the handedness that Luther brings up. And remember, those lefties are just sinister. You just don't know what to do.
And underhanded.
Underhanded, yeah. Anything else we should say about lefties, Mark?
No, it's just interesting that the right hand, maybe can we sit in your right hand and your left hand when you come in your glory? I was telling Betsy, who was on the right hand and the left hand at the crucifixion?
The 2 thieves are on the right and left of Jesus. We're going to hear that today, I think. They're not specified. We're reading Mark's gospel. Mark doesn't specify them.
Julie told us there are 100 statements against
Poor lefties. All right, let me close this in prayer and then send you out. Good and gracious God, we thank you for your wisdom to us. Help us to live according to it as best we can. Help us also to learn to trust in you when our wisdom fails us, or when we find ourselves on the wrong side of the wisdom that you have set in place here in this life. Continue to bless us throughout this Holy Week, to bless us as we explore more in your word, and especially as we read Job here this week or the next. Give to us all that you see that we need in it. Use all of these things to draw us more close to you. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.